Welcome back, guys. Welcome to the season one finale of Gotta Get Back, the Samurai Jack in review here, guys. We're joined by Aku up here. He's sitting in his chair. I'm sitting in my chair. The season one finale, guys. My name is Kyle, your host. This is the Samurai Jack in review. So we're doing a recap, a score, a favorite scene, a favorite character, and then some Jack facts, which are Jack trivia, Easter eggs at the end. You've seen the show before, guys. We have made it to the end of season one, and this is a good one. So we'll kick it off right here with the recap, guys. So we get this this little girl's running away in the city. We're back at like Coruscant again, basically, because it looks exactly like it with the flying cars and everything. This might be the spaceport from the beginning. I don't know, but like the earlier episodes. But basically, there's like the shadowy figures, and it's like Aku and Samurai Jack, and we just see the shadows, and they're like, "You will not get me this time, Samurai." And he's like, "Not. I will get you, Aku," or whatever. And so they're kind of fighting, and the sword, Jack's sword, is in the distance there. And then it cuts out, and it turns out that it's just actually a child's imagination, or just kids playing around, basically. So these kids are role playing. There's a kid who has like hair that spikes up like Aku's hair. And they're like, "Yeah, get him. And he's like bopping him on the head. And he's like, "All right, guys, I don't want to play Aku anymore." They're like, "Let me be Jack." And he's like, No. He's like, you look just like Aku. And he's like, "It's just my hair." And it's just like, whenever you get like kids using their imagination and playing together, it's so great. It's so creative. And the kid is like dressed as Jack, and they're like, No, Phil's gonna play Jack. And the guy who voices Samurai Jack, his first name is Phil, so I'm sure that was intentional. But they're like, "No, do your Samurai Jack impression." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, and he like clears his throat, and it's just Phil reading the lines. And he's like, "Aku, you will not. I will stop you this time." And it's like literally just like the Samurai Jack voice actor doing the line. So that's funny. And there's like all these kids trying to play Aku, and like Aku is watching through his lair, and he's like, "Man, the older generation like really respected me." He's like, "For aeons and years, I tortured this land, and just the name, like just my name, like scared people away." And he's like, "Now this story of hope has filled this new generation, and they're not afraid of me at all. They all just want to like be Samurai Jack." And he's like, "You know what these kids love? They love stories." And he's like, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell them a story." Aku is swallowing me whole in this episode. Aku's like, "You know what? I'm going to tell the stories to all these kids, and they're going to see me as the hero. So like they're going to worship me." And so Aku like summons all of the kids to like a giant dome, basically. And that's the chair that we got behind here. So it's basically he sits them around to like forcibly tell them stories. And he's like, "Oh, children," he's like, "I have some stories for you. I hear you like stories." And he's like, "I will tell you a tale." And he starts going on about these stories. So the first one he says is like a giant monster. It's like this weird like squid creature thing that's like threatening Earth. And he says like, there's a warrior with like 8 reindeer. And it's funny because like Aku clearly doesn't know very good storytelling. So he's like trying to do it, but it's not working very well. And so he's like, yeah, he's riding a golden chariot. And they like frame up to the hero, and his face is just expressionless. So it's really cool and super intentional that it's not like this heroic, like confident smile. It's like clearly Aku like doesn't know how to tell stories very well. So, and the warrior's like, he's got like an awkward position, but he throws the sphere and it hits the dragon thing in the stomach, whatever. It turns into beef jerky. So that's funny. And he's like, and then they feasted on like the beast slaying or whatever. And he's like, all the people ate the beef jerky and they never went hungry again. And they were like, "Who is this magic warrior?" And he takes off his helmet, and it's just Aku's face. And Aku's like smiling, and they're like all bowing down to him. And it's cool because the warrior's like posing, and then it cuts back to Aku, and he's like standing up posing, and he's like, "And that is how I came to be." And they're just like not reacting. So he's like, "Oh, you want another tale? Okay." And he just starts telling these tales. So he tells the tale of Little Red Riding Hood, but it's just Little Hood or Red Hood, I think is what he calls it. And it's actually adorable because it's just like a red triangle and a small little bit, and it's just like it's just like Aku's face, but it's like a happy Aku. And it's actually like a cute little character. And Aku comes up to the house, and it's like, oh my, it's like the big bad wolf comes on in, eats the grandmother. Aku, Little Red Riding Hood, shows up, and they're like, "Oh my, what big ears you have." And he's like, yes, I know. And then Aku just shoots with his eye. He's like, oh, but little did they know that like little Hood had laser eyes, and Aku like shoots the laser eyes to the wolf, and he's like an excellent combat strength, and he's like smacking the wolf around, spits up the grandma. I think he kills the wolf. I'm not really sure, but um, so that happens, and then they're like, nah, like they're still not impressed, and he's like, well, what about Jack? And he's like, oh, you want to hear about Jack? He's like, okay, I'll tell you some stories about Jack. And so he tells another story of the three bears, the porridge being too hot and too cold. And they're like, oh, and then like an evil samurai came, and it's like he's making Jack samurai, and his design is all off, and he's got red eyes, and he comes in there and he's like eating everything, and he's like, this porridge is so good, and he's like running around, he's like making the floor all muddy, jumping on the bed and stuff, and just wrecking everything, and the fish can't believe it there, and Jack is just a nuisance, really. And the three bears come home, and they're like, oh, someone wrecked all of our things. And they're like, who was it? And it's just Jack, and he's like got 5 o'clock shadow, and he's sitting there, he's like overweight in the bed, and looks like he's got a mean hangover. And they're like, I don't like that story, let's tell something else. So then he tells the story of the three little pigs, and the three little pigs are like hiding in the house there, and Jack comes up, and he again is like the villain, and he like the pigs are terrified in the house, and Jack cuts the door open, and he goes, here's Jackie, and that's from The Shining, obviously. So they're like, no, that doesn't sound right, and he's like, okay, he's like, how about this? And the kids start to question him, and he's like, so he tells the story of Cinderella, and he's like, the three sisters, he's like, Jacqueline, Jackie, and I forget what the other one is, but basically they're all like female Jacks. And they're yelling at Cinderella, and they're like, no, but Jack is a man. And he's like, fine. So he's like, there was a giant samurai, and he came over and stomped the house. And they're like, oh, but that's a different story. And then he's like, you're right. So then he's like, there was a frog prince, and the samurai went over and kissed him, and then the frog ate him. And like, he dies in there, and they're like, what? I thought he was on a beanstalk. He was, or they're like, I thought he was a giant. And he's like, yeah, oh, you're right. He's like, and the samurai fell off the beanstalk, and the kids are like, when was he on a beanstalk? And he's like, he's like, you're right. So he's like, okay, well, Jack was trampled by sheep. And they're like, that's not how the story goes. And he's like, you know what? A cat came over in giant boots and kicked him. And the kids are just like, what? And then it's like, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And then a horse falls on Jack. There's this great sequence because there's all these little things. Jack is playing like a flute around the castle there. And then all of the, a bunch of rats come over and just like eat him. So like, it's just a skeleton that's left. So every story that Aku is telling, it's just Jack dying. And then he basically tells the story of Aladdin, where he's rubbing the lamp, and the genie comes out and just crushes him. And then there's like a scene of a giant spider eating him. There's like a duck that comes over and punches him. There's a giant shoe, like a woman that lives in the shoe, that lands on him. There's 3 blind mice, except the mice are giant rats, and they eat him. There's 3 dudes in a boat, and they go over and hit him. And then there's like someone who shoots an arrow with an apple, but he gets the apple and it just goes through the back of his neck, which is violent. 3 guys in a tub, and they hit him. And then the last one is Humpty Dumpty, where he's literally just like, it's like a jack egg, and he falls over and spills the egg out. And they're like, no, Jack wouldn't do that. And he's like, you know what? Fine. He's like, there was a big wizard named Aku, and there was a samurai, and the wizard killed him. And he like smacks Jack, and he blows up, and he's like, the end. And then he just leaves because Aku's so frustrated, because the kids are just like, that wouldn't happen like that. And so they're like, you know what would really happen? They're like, this is how it would really go with Jack. They're like, okay, so one of the kids stands up, and he's like, Jack would be scaling this building, and it's moonlight, and it's a huge castle that he's spilling. And they're like, and another kid jumps in, and he's like, but not before he defeated this 8-foot tall, 6-armed like warrior guard or whatever, with knives in all his hands. And it's really cool design, and it shows Jack like fighting this thing, and he cuts off the arms and cuts off the robot, and he's like, yeah, he defeats that. And they're like, then he's climbing the castle again, but he's all battle wounded. So it's like Jack's shirt is ripped off, and it's just his back. And then some other girl is like, yeah, and his hair's all messy. And then like, so it shows him climbing with his hair all like tied up, and then it cuts to his hair like blowing in the wind. So that's really cool. And some kid's like, yeah, and he's carrying his sword in his mouth. And so the sword pops in. And so it's literally like the same shot, but it's changing based on what they're saying, because their imagination is just feeding into the story. So they're like, okay, so Jack gets up there and Aku, he goes to see Aku, and then one kid's like, and then they fight, and they're like, no, 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 not yet. They're like, first they stare down each other, and we see them stare down each other, and then the kid goes, and then they fight, and they go, not yet. And then Jack is like standing like a badass, almost like Goku from DBZ, and his hair's blowing in the wind, and the kid's like, no, Jack would say like, your time has come now, or your time to vanquish you, Aku. And they're like, and then they fight, and they're like, no, not yet. And then Aku says like, I forget what he says, but he says like, samurai warrior, this is the end for you. Just like one of the classic Aku lines. And then they stare each other down. He's like, and then they fight, and they're like, now they fight. And so they're like, Aku shapeshifts into like a dragon thing, but he's no match for Samurai Jack's skills. And he's like shoots fire out there, and then Jack is like deflecting with his blade. And they're like, and Jack with one mighty blow comes down and destroys Aku, and he cuts him right down the middle. And Aku's like got this look, and there's like a big red kind of line that goes over, and it explodes, and it's like all this dark energy. And they're like, and then Jack sheathes his sword, and then he says, my quest has finally come to an end. I am now at peace. I must return to my time and undo the evil that Aku has done, or something along those lines. And now the kids are like cheering, and it's like this courageous shot of Jack like standing at the edge of this like green castle in the moonlight. And that's how season 1 wraps. Okay, guys, for a magic sword, for this one, I'm gonna say it's the kids' imagination, because not only, I don't know why this is cutting out so much here. Sorry. Not only do the kids like question Aku's stories enough, so not only do they mock Aku, so they're like, dude, we don't care about you. We love Jack, and we're going to keep doing our thing, and we're going to make fun of you because we're trying to take you down. Even though Aku is ruling over everything, these kids are not afraid. So they question him and frustrate him enough where he literally is just like, fine, and he just leaves. He's like, I can't reason with these kids. And then they tell this awesome story at the end, how they're like, no, this is how Samurai Jack would really do it. And it's like a normal episode, basically. So that's really cool. And the way they put together that story, and they keep changing it, and like it's super creative, and I loved it. So those kids, like all the kids, I guess, their imagination and just their role in this episode, they've got to get the magic sword for me, this one. So A Portal in Time, it's got to be that ending story that the kids make up. So cool. I mean, all of the stories were great. I love seeing the classic tales, and Aku kind of trying to paint himself as the hero, but the kids constantly being like, no, dude, Aku would never do that. And like, they were like, you wouldn't do that, and that's not how it happened, and Jack would come kill you and stuff. And it's like, no, Jack was evil, and like I took him down. And they're like, no, he's not, he's cool. And it's like, it's just funny the way that whole worked. So but the story at the end, specifically when Aku leaves, and then the kids are like, they're all together, and they're like, you know what, this is how the story would go. And it's really cool that they have like all the different kids chip in and make a really awesome story. It's like fan fiction, basically. So I really enjoyed that aspect for sure. For a score for this one, this was a really fun episode. It was different than most of the other episodes, but I really liked it. I'm going to give it a 9-1. I'm not willing to say it's better than the rock lava I really liked. Even the Aku Beatles, the third episode. I know I gave that one kind of a lower score, but I really like that episode too. But this is one of the more fun ones, because it's not directly involving Jack, but it is like, it just shows you that his legend has grown, and no one knew who Jack was in the second episode of the series. And now we're 13 episodes in, where the first season is done. And it's like all these kids know these tales of Jack. He's becoming a folk legend. And it's like, it's cool, because Aku, who ruled over the future forever, now that Jack is here, he's like, oh, dude, he's causing me some problems. And like, I can't win these kids over, and they're rebelling, and there's hope for the future generations. And it's like, he knows this is a problem. But all that stuff is really cool. We didn't really dive into it for most of the episodes, because it's been like solo adventures with Jack. But it's clear that his adventures as he's going along have spread throughout the land, and these kids are getting to know it. So I think this has like a bigger impact on the series overall. And I think it's a really, really strong episode. Okay, guys, so Jack facts. Obviously, this one is riddled with like references to classic like fairy tales, and this one's called like Aku's Fairy Tales, and it's just like a classic spin on all of these tales, basically. So just kind of going over here, the Little Red Riding Hood one, guys, story is based on Yogi Bear, but it takes Yogi's catchphrase, picnic baskets, and furthermore, having the story incorporating the sound effects typically heard in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Jack's depiction of Three Little Pigs, in which he hacks through a hole through the door of the sword, a crazy look in his eye, says, "Here's Jackie." That's a reference to the scene in Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining, which I talked about. Phil, the kid who does the best Jack impression, is the obvious reference to Jack's voice actor, Phil Lamar, which I picked up on as well. Lamar even does Phil's impression of Jack, which we knew about, of course. The child with the 4 on his t-shirt wears his hair and clothes like the G-Force members dress in their spare time in Kagadu Ninja Tai Gotcha Man, or Battle of the Planets. Don't know what any of that means, but that is a Jack fact for the final episode of the season. So this episode is the first, and it says here the only time that Aku tries to do something about his 0% approval rating. Most of the time he doesn't care. This also makes Aku one of the few villains in fiction to do so. So yeah, very, very rarely do you see a villain like Aku try and like win over the people, and that's what Aku does here. And he just gives up at the end. He's like, this isn't working. Like, screw you, kids. So that was fun. This is the first episode where Jack also does not physically appear. So even though we do see Jack, it's really just like stories of Jack and memories of him. So, and fake tales. So that's cool because it's this first time we don't, and probably the only time in the series where we just don't see Jack at all. Really, even though we do see him on screen, it's not really Jack. It's tales of Jack. So one of the few episodes that shows Jack's skeleton when he dies in the Aku tale. The other one is episode 5. Which, if you guys remember, is when he held up his sword against the green bee gun thing, when he had a chance to go back and he let the people in the spaceship escape. So that was one of my favorite episodes, and that would show the skeleton. And I brought that up, the Return of the Jedi reference there, and this is another one where we see a skeleton. So not many episodes you see it, but it's cool that they added it in for a couple of these ones. Ironically enough, the bad Jack in Aku's tales greatly resembles the one that frequently harasses Jack in a series of hallucinations in season 5. So that is a jump ahead. That's kind of a spoiler, but we'll get back into that down the line when we get to season 5, of course. Aku's first tale is a twisted version of the battle between the 3 gods, Odin, Ra, and Vishnu, with the ultimate evil centuries ago. So that's another one. So yeah, we touched on most of these guys, but the official listing here, the fairy tales, the Little Red Riding Hood, Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, 3 Little Pigs, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, the Frog Prince, Mary Had a Little Lamb, Puss in Boots, Rapunzel, Pied Piper of Hamelin, Aladdin, Little Miss Muffet, The Ugly Duckling, There Was an Old Woman Who Lived in a Shoe, 3 Blind Mice, Rub-a-Dub-Dub, don't know what that one is, William Tell, and Humpty Dumpty. So I think we hit pretty much almost all of those. The Rub-a-Dub-Dub, I don't know what that is. So that's a kid's story. I never heard it. So it's probably for better. But those are all of the Jack facts to wrap up season 1. All right, guys. Well, that's it. We made it through 1 season of Gotta Get Back. So Jack has gone through 1 season. He obviously did not get back to the past. So we're keep going. We're going to kick off season 2 next week. If I can stop disappearing into Aku, he's trying to absorb me here as we end the first season. He wasn't too happy with those kids, and now he's trying to get rid of the reviewers. So really dumb joke. So, but going to keep it in there, guys, because that's what this channel is. It's just stupid jokes, and that's fine. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for checking out Project Potter. Thanks for checking out Gotta Get Back. Thanks for sticking with me for season 1, guys. I'm excited to keep going for season 2 through 5, especially season 5, because I know it's full screen, and I know the visuals are incredible because it was like a decade later, or if not longer. So. But I'm still enjoying these ones. The animation is really beautiful for the first series, the first season, I should say, and then I know the rest is going to be good too. So, yeah, like, comment, subscribe, guys, ring that bell notification. And until next time, guys, gotta get back.